All right, well, good morning, everybody. So for our next panel, we have invited three groundwater experts, one from Colorado, one from Nebraska, and one from Kansas, and we've asked them to share how the Ogallala aquifer is managed in their respective states. They're going to highlight both successes and challenges in managing this critically important resource for not just Texas, but in some ways the entire world, just the amount of food that it helps produce. Moderating the discussion today is Brittany Britton. She's the General Manager at Panhandle GCD and the Vice President-elect of TAGD. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage this morning.
All right, good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today on this last day. And this week has been great so far, and we have even more for you this morning. And I want to echo what many of the others have said and just thank Adam, Anik, and Stephanie. And please just tell them thank you if you see them for this great conference that they've put on this week. But as Adam said, my name is Brittany Britton, or if you were in here yesterday, my nickname to some is Brit. Thank you, Brian. I am the general manager of the Panhandle Groundwater Conservation District. We are located up by Amarillo in what I call the true North Texas in the Panhandle. And today we're going to be talking about just the different management perspectives across the Ogallala and how that can change and vary across state lines. We're going to look at some of the challenges and strengths that many of our panelists have experienced and just their unique perspectives in that. And then at the end, we will highlight the best practices and just some tips and strategies that they have that they think might be helpful for the Texas groundwater community. First, I'm just going to kind of set the stage, and I think it's important to take a moment to appreciate and just realize the massiveness of the Ogallala Aquifer. It covers over 174,000 square miles. It underlies portions of 8 states from Texas all the way up to South Dakota. Each year, around 19 million acre feet is produced from the Ogallala. And of that water, most of it, 90 to 95% is used for agricultural irrigation. And of that, that's 30% of the water used for irrigation in the United States. So it's safe to say that the water produced from the Ogallala, the commodities grown there, the impacts really expand far beyond our districts or beyond our states. There's impacts, for the entire United States and even globally. The aquifer, there are many people in the room who can tell you more about this, but it's an unconsolidated aquifer made up of sand, gravel, silt, and clay. And so again, 19 million acre feet is pumped out each year, and our recharge rate is about an inch annually. And in my area, in the Panhandle Groundwater District, we see about 1/4 of an inch annually. Our recharge comes from precipitation that fills up our playa lakes. And then we do see some recharge from agricultural irrigation. When the plant does not use all of that water, we do see some recharge from that as well. The saturated thickness varies greatly across the aquifer. I know in our district we see 25 feet, sometimes less than 25 feet of saturated thickness, all the way to 500 feet of saturated thickness. The management strategies also vary among really different districts and different states. And so that was kind of a theme we heard a couple of days ago. You know, the management can't stop at the county lines. Well, what do you do when it crosses state boundaries and you have different state laws that come into play there? So, of course, in Texas, when you own the land, you own the groundwater if that right hasn't been severed. So we recognize that as a property right. I think Kansas is kind of similar to us in that way, but many of the other states, the state owns the water, and then they appropriate it or permit it. So now that I've kind of set the stage, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists and then let them give you a very high kind of level overview of what they're doing in their states. I'm going to start with Brandy Becerra. Brandy wears many hats in Colorado for water, and today she's here as the program program coordinator for the Colorado Master Irrigator Program. If that sounds familiar to you, the North Plains Groundwater Conservation District actually developed that program, and then Brandy and her team took that from them and kind of developed it and made it work for them in Colorado. So Brandy, I'm going to hand this over to you. I think I'll keep it. I think you just have one. And just kind of let you give us an overview of what's going on in Colorado.
Thanks, Brittany. Yes, many thanks to the North Plains Groundwater Management District, who quite literally gave us a binder and told us exactly how to set up a master irrigator program in Colorado. But as far as Colorado and how we handle water across the state, it varies across the state, but specifically in regards to the Ogallala, we are within the designated groundwater basins of Colorado. There are 8 across the state, but there are 2 that sit above the Ogallala Aquifer. The Northern High Plains, which is where I live, often referred to as the Republican River Basin, and the Southern High Plains, a little bit closer to this Texas state line. Within those 2 basins, we also have groundwater management districts, again, 8 in the Northern High Plains and 1 in the Southern High Plains. The way Colorado manages water is the state does own the water, and the state will issue permits based on your use, based on your location, and the state of the basin. So, for example, Northern High Plains is over-allocated, so no permits will be issued for any high-capacity wells used for irrigation or anything of the sort. You can still get small-capacity wells for commercial use or residential, but there are no new wells being drilled as far as irrigation goes. As for the Southern High Plains, it is a little bit different. There are parts of it that are also considered over-allocated, but for the most part, you can still get a well. So the state issues the permits and enforce all the rules based on the Groundwater Commission, the rules, use and measurement rules they have developed for all water users. And then there are the groundwater management districts who work alongside the state to help enforce the rules and to help keep producers in compliance. However, the groundwater management districts do not have the authority to shut down wells, to not allow permitting or anything of the sort. They are mostly there to help keep producers and their districts in compliance with the state rules, but they can also create their own rules that will maybe surpass or go further than what the state permits. And then it's not on the slide, but additionally we also have the Republican River Water Conservation District, and they're not authority as far as permitting goes, but they are legislatively created to help us with our interstate compacts. So I'm not sure how many have heard of our pipeline that was created to pump groundwater from our basin it goes into Nebraska in order for us to comply with some compacts. So it's a little more than what we talked about, but
No, that was great. Next, we're going to go to Tyler. Tyler Nappersteck is the Assistant General Manager of the Lower Loop Natural Resource District in Nebraska. Do you want to tell us just kind of a broad overview of what's going on in Nebraska?
Yep, absolutely. So if you want to know everything about water management in Nebraska, look at this slide. You're welcome. There you go. Except, caveat, as of July of this year, we've completely redone the water drop. So this wonderful method and diagram that I was all excited to showcase is now obsolete because of our current governor and his merger and shifting around of our state agencies. So as you look at the water drop, you're going to see water quality on the right and water quantity on the left. And throughout the middle, you see the word NRD, which is not NERD, even though we are called that frequently. It is a natural resources district. Now, the NRDs date back to 1972 when we were formulated out of 154 special conservation districts. This was done through state statute, and by that methodology, we were given some authorities and given some latitude to create our own rules and regulations, which all NRDs were required to do so. Also given was the ability to monitor and manage groundwater. The groundwater itself is a state resource. And so each NRD essentially had to develop the process of how we could use that state resource for beneficial use. Naturally, we're screaming out to correlative rights. So everybody gets a fair access to the groundwater so long as it's used for beneficial use. And there's a hierarchy of rankings. So the most high is domestic and municipality use. Second is agriculture, because Cornhuskers, corn is king. And then third is industrial commercial use. So that is generally how we favor our water resource access. All the well drillers have to be licensed through a well licensing board. They have to maintain a proper well license, almost like somebody in the medical field has to maintain a certain amount of educational requirements and outreach. And there's a board that actually reviews the work that's done by the well drillers to make sure that they are meeting all parameters and qualifications that are set forth by the board. So each NRD requires permits. So you have to apply to the NRD for anything that's a high capacity well to access the water. If, because of correlative use, there isn't a benefit, then everybody has to share in the action of how we fix that. And so part of our statute, which specifically for those who are writing stuff down, or any lawyers in the room, is 46.739, and that is the layout of all the different methodologies and management schemes that NRDs can enact to control the water scheme. So we're talking anything from meters to managed reports to allocation of how much water is being applied on the ground, annual soil samples, best management practices, et cetera, et cetera. So any case, that's the way things cruised along from 1972 up until about 2004. 2004, when I started my career with the NRDs, a bomb went off. We passed LB 962, and what 962 did is it merged the state methodology for managing water, which was first in time, first in right for surface water, and it merged correlative rights with the NRDs. And lo and behold, I walked into the middle of a battle that was taking place between local management and state management. And it's been very interesting to watch that whole thing take place. It's actually turned out 20 years later to be a successful, albeit with some growing pains there. But a little more background on the NRDs. So we are property tax funded, so we get a portion of how much assessed property valuation comes out. We also have an elected board, just like you would elect a local county commissioner or a state senator. And that board develops rules and regulations that have to be upheld and enforced. If somebody violates that, it goes to district court through a hearing process. Everything the NRD does is on a public front setting. So anytime we instigate a rule or regulation, it has to be done through stakeholder public outreach. It has to be publicized. It has to go through the whole rigmarole. And the state does get the opportunity to weigh in their opinions of the matter, so to make sure it's along the right lines. So 962 comes along. It also gave us some tools to access different fundings and allowed us to be a little more proactive and enter in different management and coalition schemes with our fellow NRDs. So what initially started out as a battle has actually kind of turned out to be a benefit, because now NRDs can manage for stream flow, we can manage for overall quality of life in the different basins that we encompass. And going forward, I think it's been a success story. But I'd be happy to answer more questions on that.
Thank you. Well, one thing, a term that you and Brandy have both said today, you've both used the term high capacity well. Do you mind just kind of defining that for us, how Colorado sees it and then how Nebraska sees it?
I'd rather go after you because you do a much better job, so I can copy what you say. So with Colorado, essentially the difference between a high capacity well and a smaller capacity well is not only just the capacity, but technically what the use is. Small capacity wells, I believe, and I need to freshen up on my actual rules, are lower than 50 gallons per minute or right at the 50 gallons per minute. They are not used for any sort of irrigation. They are mostly used for feed yards or some sort of commercial purposes, and then residential. Whereas high capacity wells are used for irrigation and some of the larger capacities. And when I say high capacity, it can be anywhere from 75 gallons per minute up to 1,1500. That's typically what we see.
Ours is 50 gallons per minute as well. Anything over or up to and over 50 gallons per minute requires to get a permit from the NRD. And that can be anything from irrigation, commercial, industrial, livestock. We've seen some high capacity wells go towards feed yards. It can be any conglomeration of wells, so they could have 10 5-gallon per minute wells, but if they are all tied together, then it requires a permit. So for a singular use, it does require a permit through the NRD, and then again, we assess beneficial use. If a well drill would drill without going through the permit process and it turns out to be a high capacity well, they could potentially lose their well drilling license and get penalty from the state, which is issued by that well licensing board I mentioned. That's one of the parameters or responsibilities that the NRDs are responsible for doing for as we go out and check wells to essentially see if they're being used for their intended purpose. And then we also decommission wells. So if there's an open well out there, we'll make sure it's closed off so we're not getting contamination to the aquifer.
All right, thank you. So next we have Dwayne Roth, who is a landowner of Front Porch Farms in Kansas. Dwayne, do you want to kind of walk us through what is going on in Kansas?
Yeah, thank you. Basically, going back to what Adam, when he was going back to talking about the legislative bills in Texas, Kansas in 2023, we passed Bill 2279. That requires the GMDs, we have 5 of them, to come up with some type of plan based on a Q stable. That Q stable is the amount of water that can be pumped in a region, but then what can it be, either replenished through stream flow or natural recharge. And so what the GMD3 is where we farm at, they declare the whole GMD3 a high priority area. Now they have to submit a proposal back to the chief engineer. They may have already, but leading up to that, what our GMD3 did, thank you, they had meetings during the winter in each county to bring farmers in and get their thoughts, to build on this, what's a cut's gonna look like, how bad is the haircut gonna be. If you could flip back to that last. What they did, they actually did a Q stable. In Kansas, we measured the water. We have water meters on every irrigation well. It's a requirement by the state. We turned that report in for the prior year by March. But during the January, the Kansas Geological Survey, they go out and they measure thousands of wells, and they use those same wells to see what that recharge rate is. So if it has dropped, if it's come up. We actually farm north of Garden City. You'll see that light blue area. For our area, we're gonna have to take an 8.6% cut. Now there's other areas down there you see 27, 35. They've brought up some different scenarios on like, okay, how do you get to this Q stable by this X amount of time? So right now we're looking at, if you got a 27% cut, those producers in that area, they're gonna take like maybe a 15. It's still in discussion with the GMD3 board on how this is gonna look like. What's important in this region though, if you could visualize a 60-mile triangle We have 4 beef processors and 2 dairy processors. We process about 25,000 head per day when at capacity. Several million heads of cattle. We don't have it on this side. We bring bring cattle up from Texas and milk into these processing plants as well. At our local high school, it really is an economic engine. We have like 26 different languages spoken at our high school. It's very unique. So how do you stabilize an economy? And it's our water. You know, we don't have the population like Texas does here. But a few years ago, K-State, and I think it was Texas A&M, beef brings in $168,000 per acre foot to the economy of Kansas. Dairy brings in $97,000 per acre foot to the economy of Kansas. Corn brings in $900 and some dollars. Now I know the markets have changed now, so that's not the same factor. But you know, the feed yards and also the dairies, they need forage. We can rail corn in from the I-states in Nebraska, but we cannot bring in locally grown forages. They just brought in Hilmar to Dodge City. That's 130,000, 140,000 more milking cows that we didn't have before on the system. How do we manage that? So it is going to have to be some type of reduction. Maybe you look at a 5-year allocation to do that with. Why I'm saying that is we can have every conservation plan in place, every type of incentive in place to that producer. But if corn goes up to $8, guys, you know as well as I do, every conservation plan is off the books. A producer has heavily in debt. They're going to grow the product, which brings the most income to that farm. And right now, you know, those crops are the most highest intensity water use. If you looked at a pie chart, the withdrawal out of the Ogallala, irrigated corn, alfalfa, it's about 95%. The feed yards and the dairy, they just use maybe 2% of that. So, you know, we've really got to, we're coming up with plans. There's been some blunt discussions. The last thing I'm going to bring up is well, I think that's going to be on the next, I'll stop there.
Thank you. So now we're just going to kind of move into the different challenges that y'all are seeing, some of the biggest challenges that either your organization or your state is facing when it comes to groundwater. Why don't I let you continue on, Dwayne?
So the state of Kansas, we have 2 options for. First, it's a voluntary reduction. It's called a water conservation area. That's a written agreement that my family has and others who want it. So years ago, we decided, you know what, we're gonna reduce our water use by 15%. What good does that do when the next person is not doing it? Well, that's a written agreement with the chief engineer in the Kansas Department of Agriculture that if say, enforcement would come up or anything else, that shows our past conservation. So it not only protects us, but it shows a history that we have been conserving. So it protects that part of our water, which isn't on this slide. In northern Kansas, it's called the Sheridan 6. It's about a 100 square mile area. That Q stable was built around that feed yard. And that GMD4 come together. Those growers, they get 55 inches over a 5-year span. So through K-State and some other independent academia, the growers inside that Sheridan 6, they were just as profitable, if not more profitable, than the growers outside that Lima. And so it is working. 2016, 2017, I thought, you know what? Instead of griping, I'm going to try to do something. So in my counties, Kearney County and Finney County, I try to spearhead a local enforcement management area. We were looking at a 15% reduction. It completely turned neighbors against neighbors. People pointed fingers. I mean, you really seen the worst come out in folks, and I failed miserably at it. And so that's why, and the GMD did, you know, they was able to allow to work in their office, but we really need somebody like the groundwater districts. You know, they're the management areas. They're the ones that need to push this forward if it's gonna work.
Thank you. Brandy, what about for Colorado? What are some of the biggest challenges that either you or the state is facing right now?
Well, just like others, I think our biggest challenge is the fact that we are just running out of water. If you recall the first slide that has the map of Ogallala, we live on the very edge of it in the northern high plains, and it is very quickly running out of water. There have been estimates that if we continue as we are right now, we will be done irrigating in 50 to 80 years. That sounds like a long time unless you're trying to plan for your future families. And then I'll just kind of reiterate what Dwayne said. The conservation mindset is very hard. We all know, well, we don't all know, but we know that we're running out of water. And yet, you have to stay in business. Farmers need to remain profitable. You can't just say, hey, I need you to cut back 25% of your water use. Because in doing so, you're asking them to take a cut and pay. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I refuse to do that for the greater good. I still have bills to pay, right? So it's challenging with that mindset to try to decide how you're going to make it perfect for everyone, how you're going to be able to manage the water and at the same time keep everybody in business, because our economies need agriculture. Another part of our issue is I'm quite literally sitting in between two states that really don't like Colorado. We have a lot of...
That's not true.
We have interstate compacts that we are required to come into compliance with. So Colorado is a headwater state. And I believe, and I was trying to check my statistic last night, so I apologize, over 60% of it is not allocated to us. So all the mountains, all the snow, all that great stuff is fantastic, but we have to let it go to other states. And in our northern high plains specifically, we don't get any of the snow recharge. So the water that we use for irrigation is over what we typically are allowed to use within those compacts. Thus, the pipeline I referred to earlier, where we have to pump 13 to 15,000 acre feet of water to just kind of make up for our overuse. But within those interstate compacts, and if I start talking too much, please kick me. But within those interstate compacts, one agreement that came forth in 2016 was we're required to retire or dry up 25,000 irrigated acres in a very specific area called the South Fork Focus Zone. That zone alone has roughly 100,000 irrigated acres. So we are required to dry up 25% of it. That's a large hit to very small communities. And thus, one of the main motivators of why we leaned on the North Plains Groundwater Conservation District and designed our Colorado Master Irrigator program. Because how do you ask communities to take such a hit for the greater good? And so if you haven't heard of Master Irrigator, I highly encourage you to take a look at it. It is essentially finding those tools and those practices on how you can make such huge reductions or more efficiency parts of your groundwater or your irrigation use and still remain profitable. And then finally, one of our other challenges is the groundwater management districts do play a vital role in that they are the only ones within the state that can create or make a conservation plan. The state issues the permits, but they can't reduce your usage. They can't lower what you have been permitted to use. The groundwater management districts would be able to, but unfortunately they don't have means to enforce those rules. So we have this odd balance of, who could actually make the cuts, but then who could be the enforcer.
Thank you. Tyler, what about you? What are some of the challenges that you're facing in Nebraska? Do you want to talk about interstate compact?
Besides suing Colorado, right?
We all know.
Go to the next slide. Okay, so we do have some of the similar problems as far as running out of water on the west end of the state. So I don't know if you guys saw my pre-development to today map, but there are some areas of some drawdown and there's allocations going on, and we're actually trying to back the train back up to 1997. But when I got challenged with this question, I looked at more of a full approach. When the NRDs were formulated back in '72 and as they developed their groundwater management plans, one of the most consistent things that we were constantly battling was groundwater nitrates. And so what the map I have up here demonstrates the statewide record that we have, the clearinghouse database. And every one of those dots represents a triggering point of greater than 10 parts per million, which is over the drinking standard. And what we're seeing is that trend is not lessening. So Nebraska is blessed in the fact that we aren't running out of water, but we're cursed in the fact that the water we have, we're poisoning with nitrates. And the problem with that is, as more research is coming along, we're starting to see some adverse health effects. And there's what I've always felt with the problem with groundwater nitrates is nitrates are one thing, but it's really the canary in the coal mine, because our farmers put on a lot more stuff on our fields to grow great corn, and we do grow great corn. It's better than Iowa's. Anyway, we are constantly trying to chase that bigger bushel and try to feed the world and go for that next high level. And in doing so, we're flushing a lot of nasties down the hole that's going to end up in our grandchildren's drinking water. And so when I see a map like this, I just shudder, because once those nitrates are embedded, there's a whole world of bad that comes out of that. Besides the adverse health effects of nitrates itself, there's also been some studies that showcase that nitrates will actually loosen up uranium deposits in any sort of clay layering and release uranium into the water, and that's bad news for anybody. And like I said, there's other elements as well. And so to address this, the district's instigated groundwater management areas, which require an advanced level of management and annual reports and annual soil samples and all sorts of stuff that the producers have to go through, and the producers are. So one of the particular instances for my district is we required back in 2014 that any of our areas that are designated high nitrates, and we have 3 of them, are required to have a meter on, and that meter has to be read by my staff that go out and actually take an annual report, and then that number is reported back to the producer. As you could probably guess, to a lot of bemoaning and griping about that number being told back to the people as far as what they utilized. But our goal there was to essentially give them a tool that they could capitalize the nitrates that were already available in their groundwater and credit that towards their system. 10 years later, we still aren't getting anywhere. We still have high nitrates. The standard, or the average across our management areas, is almost triple the drinking standard. That's not good. So 2 years ago, we naturally went back out to the public and said, okay, this isn't working. We're already doing all these other items. Let's look at a real proactive approach and say absolutely no application outside of when there's a growing crop in the field. Because one of the common practices that we see in the areas that there's a lot of nitrates that you see on the map here is guys will go out in the fall on November 1st, as soon as the corn crop is cleared, and start applying anhydrous. Now, that's all fine and good if it snows the next day, but our last 3 winters have actually been really temperate. And the groundwater, or the ground soil temperature, has been, in some cases, greater than 50 degrees up until Christmas. That doesn't sound like Nebraska, I know, but it has been that way. And so what we are seeing is that anhydrous that's in the soil, NH4, mobilizes and becomes readily available to flush down into the nitrates, and we're contributing to the problem. The other issue that we see is that we are growing phenomenal bushels. 20 years ago, 220 per acre was actually swinging for the fences pretty good, and now that is very pedestrian. In fact, most guys are making that without trying too hard. So they're constantly etching up and actively pursuing the 300 bushel total that they're trying to get, or better. And so what we're trying to do now is say, okay, you have to only apply in season and put your fertilizer on when there's a crop that's there to utilize it. And the pushback and the reaction we got was substantial. As you could probably imagine, that's not how Grandpa did it, and we're not going to make any changes right now. But our governor keeps saying education and technology are the way that we're going to fix this, and there are some phenomenal technologies out there. In fact, there's a group that actually do a day-by-day analysis or photo capturing of the amount of chlorophyll that's in the corn plant, and then they can prescribe and adjust the fertilizer program on the fly. And so we're trying to promote those kind of technologies. We offer cost share to do so, and we're meeting with some moderate success. So I think the next step is more stringent regulation, which of course raises hackles and gets people really excited about that. But without it, we're going to continue to see the map get more and more purple and darker colors coming across the whole area.
Thank you for that. Now that we've kind of talked about the bad and the challenges, let's kind of switch and talk about the examples or good things that are going on either in your state or at your individual organizations that you're proud of, or that maybe we can look to and replicate here. We'll just kind of go back this way. Tyler, we'll start back with you.
So I started when I talked about the overview of the state. And then would you back up to the first Nebraska slide? There you go. So 962, and I'll keep hammering on that because, like I said, I walked into the middle of people tipping over tables and having fist fights out in the parking lot at meetings just like this, and it was kind of an awe-inspiring time to be involved and, start your career off. One of the things that 962 did for us is allowed us to proactively approach the groundwater quantity problem. And as you can see on the map on the right, we're not without our own problems. We have some areas that there's definitely an overabundant or over amount of pumping that's coming out of the aquifer, but you can also see some areas where there isn't, or that isn't the case. And with 962, we were allowed to develop and approach some state funding that would assist the NRD. So take our property taxes that we're already evaluating, grab some state funding, and then go after some federal funding to be more proactive and do some recharge projects and do some offsets and retiming. And what we saw is the response from that has been extremely positive. Another item that we are looking at and that we've actually instigated several of the NRDs is developing a drought plan. So 2002, we had a drought. 2012, we had a very severe drought, and we're just getting almost done with the last one we had in 2022. And so one of all of the districts are starting to look more proactively at, okay, how do we assess if we are in a drought? Trying to determine if you're in a drought is a really kind of fishy thing because, there's the groundwater side of it, there's the surface water flow side of it, there's the pumping side of it, there's just the outside weather side of it. And so there's a lot of different capacities that you could say, well, I'm in a drought. And so what a drought plan does is gets a group of stakeholders together to objectively look at it and say, okay, we are in a drought. How are we going to mitigate this drought going forward? And we have done that. And in doing so, we have, by choice or by chance, determined that putting more and more meters on and requiring flow meters on all high-capacity wells is the best way to manage the groundwater usage in the area. So there's a statement going around Nebraska right now that in order to manage it, you have to measure it. And that's been the first step. And I was involved with some of those meetings. It was almost kind of comical because we gave the guys the full run of the gambit. We said, you come up with whatever card you want to play and however you want to address it, but you tell the NRDs what you think you want to do and how you want to fix this problem. And 10 times out of 10, they all came back and said, you got to meter the wells. Don't like it, hate it, but even in areas where there isn't problems, you have to have a meter on. You have to be measuring how much pumping is taking place. And so we've been going down that path, and I'm here to tell you, we haven't crashed the ag economy yet. It's still cruising right along. Our water levels are actually holding pretty steady. Our stream flows are sitting pretty good. We have a decent relationship with the state, decent. I always use the term, I'm on my 6th director of the department and 4th governor, so that could change tomorrow, who knows. But any case, so far so good. We're also utilizing our irrigation reservoirs that were developed back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we are effectively off-timing and retiming the amount of water, so we're offsetting some of those usage, which is why you see some of the successes in those areas that are blue on that map on the right.
Thank you. Brandy, what about you? What are some of the success stories out of Colorado?
Well, you're welcome for those great stream flows,
Yep.
But I think some of the big successes is we are seeing a huge mindset shift. When we started talking about the water levels and the conservation plans and just the idea of making some sort of changes, we were hit with some pretty big walls and some pretty adamant opposition. But in the last, I would say, 5 years, I think that an earlier panelist was mentioning, that mind shift has really changed. Instead, we're starting to see, okay, we realize we need to do something, just tell us what to do. And so I consider that a really huge success as far as how education has been going and just in general, trying to work with everyone to make it happen. Additionally, the RRWCD, the Republican River Water Conservation District, has had huge successes in being able to purchase water rights and get those wells retired. They have hit over 17,000 acres of that 25,000 acre requirement. That is required to be retired by 2029. So to already have the 17,000 contracted and in the midst of, being retired, it's quite a success, and they're doing a lot to get those additional 8,000 done as well. I'm also going to say Colorado Master Irrigator has been a huge success. We started back in 2020 with our first class, so we have had 5 years of programs, and we have now spread significantly across the state. There's only a few places that we don't have a program available. We have 5 currently running annually, so we have typically 125 to 150 graduates each year. So that's touching a lot of irrigated acres and really helping shift this mindset.
Thank you. I'm enjoying the kind of theme of working with the stakeholders here. And Dwayne, I think that's one of your successes in Kansas, right? Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, after that failed Lima I tried doing, I knew the farmers, we couldn't do it by ourselves. So I started going to conferences. I love talking to people, love meeting people, and we just connecting the dots. So now we actually call it the Ogallala Roundtable, but we have anywhere from General Mills to Costco, the folks who buy all the hamburger from McDonald's, like, what the hell, what are you guys doing? What can you do? And so on that eye care map you showed, we were talking about incentives, we're talking about companion products maybe at the NRCS on CSP, but we have to wait to see what happens here on this action plan. Then, with this group, as I mentioned, what can we do together? Because again, we have 4 big packers, 2 dairy processors. They've been engaged. We have to collectively come together as a group to do this, and we've got to watch we got to be careful on these incentives again. The next thing we're doing, as you see there above that 8.6 at Garden City, we farm north of there. One of our landlords, they're about 27,000 acres. We farm about 2,000 acres of that. But if you imagine a rectangle of 17,000 irrigated acres, a circle. So we're using a lot of technology too. We have various soil moisture probes placed throughout there. We have, again, meters on every well. But we're using actually OpenET. It's a group of Landsat satellites. About every 7-8 days, they fly over the Earth. They take evaporation off that circle, what's leaving the atmosphere, what's leaving the plant, the atmosphere. So we don't have a meter, though, on every circle. So how close can we fine-tune OpenET, if you don't have a meter, to that circle? So we know how much. We have one thing with Kansas, we can take various wells to various locations. Again, just that well has that meter on it. So how does OpenET look like that? 2022, we had the mother of all droughts, another example of OpenET. We had to keep the water, we had to abandon several circles of corn. The adjuster, federal crop, going by the book, everything was done properly. You can irrigate a slice of it, but you got to keep the pivot on or try to irrigate the whole thing, which we did. But later that winter, we went back to OpenET. We looked at, boy, that NDVI, that plant was already dead then. And so now we're actually working with RMA and OpenET, like, okay, could we have shut that circle off sooner than later? And with scientists, RMA, on just that one circle of my nephew's, I think we could have shut it off. We would have saved 20 million gallons of water. That circle had already failed. We couldn't grow rocks that year, you guys. Like, again, we had average temperatures, I think, were 105, 0 precipitation. It just, even with the proper crop rotation, we just couldn't do it. So that's kind of the technology and the engagement that we're doing in Kansas. What we're looking at doing, this is Southwest Kansas. It's Ogallala Group with all the independents, the public. the private companies, we're looking to how do we expand that. Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, Colorado. We had to have a launch pad to do it, and so that's why we're looking at Western Kansas.
We have about 10 minutes left together, so I was hoping we could just take some time and each of you could just share, 1 to 2 actionable items that you think could help groundwater managers or practitioners in Texas. Just what's your best kind of key takeaway? And Brandy, I'm going to start with you.
This one is probably the hardest question that you posed, and I would hate to suggest anything to you all. You guys are the experts already. I don't know much about what you could possibly do. What I have found most successful, I think, in all of my very limited years of working with the water is to start from the ground up as opposed to top down. I feel like the success of Colorado Master Irrigator has been due to our producer involvement. Instead of relying on research and higher up expertise, we've literally gone to the ground and said, what do you need? How can we help? And I feel like that's very essential to it.
Tyler, what about you?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough angle. Like suddenly you're in front of the firing squad, but I'll go ahead and get shot. So the 2 things I would recommend: data. And I saw one of the presenters earlier that talked about getting a clearinghouse or kind of a gathering of all the available information that's out there. And I'm sure there's a whole slug of data. But we have a really good coalition working relationship between the USGS Conservation Survey Division and all 23 natural resource districts, as well as the state. So we're always collaborating, we're working together, we're drilling additional test holes, we're doing aerial electromagnetic survey, which is where they fly the helicopter over with the giant dream catcher on the bottom and do a survey essentially of the available aquifer material that's there. In some cases, it can be volumetric, so you can figure out exactly how much yield you can develop. So there again, know how much you're working with. And then the next step is model. I don't have a map with me, but literally every square inch of Nebraska is covered by some level of model. Now, in a lot of cases, it's a regional model, so it's high level, it's very coarse grid cell size, that kind of stuff. But from there, you can always elevate your game and do a more refined boundary and say, okay, well, we have the boundary conditions because we're going to use the boundary model that's been calibrated and checked against real-world data. Let's go ahead and refine that and turn that dial up and see exactly what we're dealing with as far as resource in, resource out. And then what you're going to find is there's going to be some hard decisions that need to come out of that model. There's going to be some activities that may not make everybody pleased, such as putting meters on everything so that people know how much they're pumping. One of the other items that we do is we fly our entire district with high resolution infrared, and then we police our irrigated acres because we are in a moratorium. We do not allow additional irrigation to go in without a variance or proper procedure. In some cases, it's pivots that have been up for 30, 40 years. Tornado came along, tipped it over, tore it up, and the guy put too big of a pivot back on. We will go in and enforce that guy to scale back, and not only scale back, but he has to retire double the amount of acres of the penalty that he did for the first year. Failure to do so can potentially risk a cease and desist on his entire operation. You got to be able to fight the hard fights, and that's out there as well. So I kind of have a 3-prong approach as far as that goes.
Thank you. What about you, Dwayne?
I just think we have 5 GMDs in Kansas. I think you guys said you had 96.
98, right?
So it's a little different animal. But I think just going back from a past experience, engagement, bringing, like our GMD3, they started having these town hall meetings. And I tell you what, people, it takes a while to vent through. 2017, 18, K-State sociology, they went back and interviewed 1,500 farmers. All the 90-some% agreed we need some type of conservation. We need to save some for the next generation. My nephews are the 5th. It's a tough deal. I mean, the first meeting when this potential LEMA we put on, I came home, I told my wife, she goes, how'd it go? I said, oh my God, I said, nobody agreed with me. And she like, no crap, nobody agreed with you, But that's how, we took some couple hits, but now we are where we're at. So, I mean, I just don't, I think, like I say, we know the science, we know how to measure it, quantify it. What are some realistic goals that folks can start having input on?
Yeah, and one more thing I want to ask you, Dwayne, is you talked about meeting with Costco and the people that buy McDonald's beef. And can you just expand on that just a little bit on how you got those people to come to the table to kind of help solve this problem?
General Mills are worried about their supply chain. We grow a lot of hard red winter wheat. We grow wheat where we're at. But then if you look at the dairies coming in and everything else, triticale, sorghum, forage sorghum, we're looking at more competition. We've got, like Texas does, we've got just in our 8-mile area, we've got 2 major train loaders that go down here to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're worried about that. Costco on the beef side, Costco has a board of directors. They're looking at risk as well. McDonald's, they're always going to have a board of directors. They have their corporate goals. And so, I was just left at a loss of I didn't have nowhere else to go, and I started talking to them, and, we've got to be able to connect all the dots. Yeah. And if we don't have the end user engaged with us, we can't connect that last dot. When our corn basis is quite a bit higher than Illinois', but by the time that Illinois' corn gets here, it's about the same. How do we manage that? It's all an economic driver. So how do we work with these groups, McDonald's and such? That's why I'm saying we just started last year with it, and I'd be more than happy. I can share the contacts with you if you want to. Anybody has any questions, Brittany or Adam can give you my contact information.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes. I'd love to do some audience questions if there are any. Adam, have you had any come in? Oh, good.
None online yet.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. The Great Lakes states, those bordering Great Lakes, and Ontario have formed a compact on how much water can be drawn from each state. And they've got some pretty strict rules. Governors can actually be incarcerated. And having spent most of my professional career in Illinois, we had 3 governors thrown into the slammer. Incarcerated, not for drawing water out for other reasons. But in looking at this, where there are 8 states in this, is it possible to form an overall compact? Now, I realize that the movement of surface water and, of course, the movement of groundwater are completely different. But has there been any thought of trying to get an overall compact for the Ogallala?
I can answer that. So, to a certain degree, yes. It's probably not a governmental contact. However, I really was not here for promotion, but the Master Irrigator Program is working really hard to have multi-state kind of interaction and to somewhat do exactly what you're asking, right? We all are working from the same water source and with the same challenges or very similar challenges despite those imaginary state lines. And so the idea and the concept of Master Irrigator is to break down those lines and start having those interstate conversations to see what we can do, whether it's through legislature or just people, because it is important and we all share the same water.
There were some existing compacts out there. In fact, as of Monday, my state just put a lawsuit in against the Supreme Court against her state because of a 1923 compact. So sometimes you got to be careful what you wish for.
And there are no fist fights in the parking lot, so it's okay.
One thing I would like to share with the group, and this is beneficial to all of you, is information is out there. So Groundwater Management Districts Association and National Water Resource Association are 2 great resources that you yourself can get involved with and educate your individual districts with what's going on nationwide. And we can just have these kind of discussions about the Ogallala and what's going on with the pollutant factor in Miami that may cause Maui, excuse me, that may cause federal overreach and waters of the U.S. and all that information. There's an absolute drinking from a fire hose opportunity for you to educate yourself on what's taking place there. So shameless plug for GMDA and NWRA.
Thanks for that. Do we have some more questions right here? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you all very much for coming down and being willing to try to help the state of Texas here. So speaking of it, it's a little foreign to me. When I picture a river, or a couple of y'all, in particular Tyler and Brandy, you mentioned allocation of groundwater. When I picture a river, that's easy to understand how much water can be allocated, how much water right can be allocated from a river. Groundwater, it seems quite vague. If you could help just explain how you determine allocation in general, how to know when to shut off or not allow any more permits, that would be great. Thank you.
So for us, our groundwater allocation is based on what the crop is going to be on top. So corn is king in Nebraska, so there is a standard net irrigation requirement, and that falls back to that model I was talking about. You need to figure out what it exactly takes to grow a bushel of corn on an acre of property. And in order to do that, you obviously have to model. And then the decisions come down to you look at a 20-year average, 25-year average, that kind of stuff. You can sort out those details later, but essentially we use the net irrigation requirement to say it takes this much water to grow corn, and the other side of the coin we look at is what are we contending against? Because maybe corn isn't the best crop to grow. It's a very hungry crop. It uses a lot of water. So in those areas of my state where the depletions are as such that we can't sustainably grow corn year after year, the allocation is set for the aquifer. What is going to allow our aquifer to be maintained based on the amount of acre inch or acre foot pumping? And so that's the idea that we look at.
So ours will be a little archaic, I suppose, in comparison. Our allocation are based on beneficial use and consumptive use that was calculated at the time of permitting. So that could be clear back in 1960 up to, I think it was closed around early 90s. So your allocations don't change as the years go on. The water, what you're permitted is acre feet. So for example, if you have a well that was permitted to irrigate 120 acres or 160 acres on your circle and you were allotted 400 acre feet, whether or not your well can pump that, that's still your permitted amount. And the only way that it's tracked is through our meters. We do have all of our wells metered, at least in the northern high plains, and you have to submit your usage annually. There are a lot of different, kind of caveats to that and different rules, but your annual usage reports are what show us as the state how much you have used and whether or not you've stayed within your allocations, and then, there could be punishments if you didn't. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. I think you addressed it. I see it's like, oh, there's still more water in this aquifer. Can we pump it? And maybe there is some sort of limit that you're setting based on what you're trying to accomplish. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists today. Thank you so much for coming down to Texas and being with us today and sharing all of your knowledge and your insights. So please help me in saying thanks.